So the next piece of our agenda is the opportunity gap. It's a presentation and discussion that we're eager to have with you. Many of you may know that one of the areas of focus for CUNY Start over the next year is really kind of looking at our own data, I think in a very in-depth way, and questioning some of our own outcomes. One of which is really looking at student success within our own programs, comparing it to other students, and also asking and challenging ourselves about, are there things we should be thinking about? Are there things that are not necessarily, I think, going as well as we'd like them to, and not in a way that says we are not doing a good job, but in a way that I think says there are things that we know if we do better really could push outcomes and push success for people in New York City, and I think that's what we want. So today I'm going to introduce two speakers that will both be working together, both of whom I know very well. So I'm first going to introduce Drew Allen. He is the Director of Office, Research, Evaluation, and Program Support. You've heard the name REPS, that's Drew. He oversees the development and implementation of a comprehensive research agenda and strategy for many programs throughout the Office of the Senior University Dean, with the goal of providing program directors and their staff with data and information essential for program development and improvement. His bio is in the folder, as well as Derek's. I'll read a little bit more. What you should also know about Drew is that he has been instrumental in the success in bringing CUNY Start to a place that we really can look at data and talk about our data. So it's been as a result of his unit and a result of all of the work and dedication that he has put into this program. So I did want to thank him before we start. I don't think I'm going to have a chance, but his work has really allowed CUNY Start to have deep discussions about remedial education in this country, so thank you, Drew. The second presenter is Derek Griffith. He is serving as the acting Dean of Student Success and Enrollment Management at Medgar Evers College at CUNY, where he previously served as the acting Assistant Provost for Student Success. Derek has a broad cross-campus responsibilities for assessment, promotion of student success, with a focus on recruitment, retention, and graduation. There are a number of things. Again, Derek's bio is inside your folder. Derek Griffith and I have known each other for, I believe, entering on the 10-year mark. No, 15? 15. So Derek, the other piece you should know about Derek Griffith, he was the founder and principal of a program here in the Bronx known as CUNY Prep. It was, started for young people who had dropped out of high school with the goal to help them return to school, get their GED, and come to college. And so Derek and I worked very closely over many years. He was also the executive director at Groundworks. He has been a really tireless advocate for students, not only in the Bronx, but all through New York City, and now in Brooklyn. So I'm very pleased to welcome both Drew Allen and Derek Griffith.
Thank you. So my presentation will really be, if anything, just setting the stage for Derek's work. And so we wanted to first really introduce this concept of an opportunity gap, and really to think about what exactly are we talking about, what does it mean? I know this is the first of several conversations that will take place, and then provide some data to really set the stage. So you have a copy of the PowerPoint in your folders. There are a couple of minor differences that you'll see, but you can pretty much follow along if you can't see the screen. But I thought it would be first interesting just to set the stage and perhaps useful to start with a quote from Arne Duncan, who's the U.S. Secretary of Education, in a talk he was giving a few years ago in Topeka, Kansas, around an event looking at the anniversary of the Brown versus the Board of Education, really looking at opportunity and achievement gaps in our country. And so this is a part of his speech. So he says, as a nation, we are still far from truly achieving equal education opportunity. In America, children of color not only confront an achievement gap, they confront an opportunity gap that too often is unacceptably wide. And so what I really like about this quote is, number one, he makes a distinction between achievement gap and opportunity gap. And that's what we kind of wanted to highlight here first. With an achievement gap, that term has been used quite often among policymakers and researchers in referring to these differences, either in test scores or in other outcomes, degree attainment, among certain subgroups of students. And he, in this speech, really reframed the conversation around an opportunity gap, really taking it away from looking at these gaps that we see to understanding what's leading to some of these issues that we're seeing. How are opportunities for students unequal, and how are opportunities or lack thereof leading to some of these outcomes that we're seeing? And so I really like that quote, and I would suggest that you look at this and think about how you conceptualize opportunity gap. This is another piece of that speech which I really liked, obviously. Part of it is looking really at academics. And so the speech is it's targeted toward the public schools in this country. And I really wanted to start the conversation, couch it within the public schools first. So in here, he really highlights this issue of different and unequal opportunities for students starting in the public schools. So in a knowledge-based economy, academic rigor matters more than ever in preparing students for college and careers. This is, of course, no surprise to everyone here. But today, a student in a school with high minority enrollment is much less likely to go to a school that offers calculus and physics than a student in a high school with low minority enrollment. Not just this, research has shown that across the board, schools with high minority enrollment, high Black and Hispanic student populations, have much fewer resources, they have much fewer courses available to students, both in the elementary, middle school, and high school level. And so what we're looking at, and what we're dealing with in this country, is a situation where there are unequal opportunities. Not all students have the same opportunity to learn and to take courses and prepare themselves and get prepared for college. And so I think that's really where CUNY START comes in, is thinking about how can CUNY and CUNY START really work with students who are coming from backgrounds with incredible diversity in terms of academic opportunities and context. And so, pose the question, how do opportunities help close the achievement gap? One, unequal opportunities don't necessarily close the achievement gap, they exacerbate it. And so I would hope that you would think about this question throughout the rest of the presentation, really. How do opportunities, how do CUNY START, how do other opportunities like ASAP, and other programs at your schools really help close the achievement gap? And are these opportunities equal, unequal, and so forth? And so I wanted to highlight here really the role and responsibility of CUNY START. CUNY START is serving students who are coming to this university who have been flagged by the university as needing additional academic preparation, needing remediation. And so I wanted to present some statistics to really highlight the student population, and even tie it back to some of the unequal opportunities that these students have faced. So these are numbers that are not shown too often, and I wish they were shown a little bit more. There was a typo in your actual handouts, but the numbers here on the screen are correct. So on the left-hand side, you see students needing remediation coming into the university. You see the racial ethnic breakdown. 13% of the students of all the students needing remediation, 13% are Asian, 32% Black, 40% Hispanic, and 14% white. Contrast that with the students coming into the university not needing remediation. And you see very clearly the differences here. And these differences are reflecting a huge opportunity gap that Derek will talk about in a second. But I wanted to really highlight these statistics. So how does CUNY START compare? So comparison to overall students coming into the university needing remediation, what does the racial ethnic breakdown look like for CUNY START students? And as you can see, CUNY START students are largely Black and Hispanic, 9% Asian, 35% Black, 48% Hispanic, and 9% white. So in some ways, CUNY START is representing certainly an incredibly diverse population, and in large part, looking at the data, students who are not coming from the best schools by any means, and students who have not had the academic opportunities in their schools to really be able to get the preparation they need to succeed in college. And so in some ways, if you look at who CUNY START serves, you can make the argument that CUNY START, because of the students that they're serving, that you're serving, you really are trying to address the unequal opportunities and to provide students the extra support to really start to close the achievement gap. So we wanted to just a few more data slides, I promise, looking at some outcomes for students, just so you can get a picture of some of the things that we're looking at, and we would hope you would really start to think about in terms of your own programs. First, looking at math proficiency gains. So these tables show CUNY START students in terms of the percentage who gain proficiency in math compared to our comparison group that we constructed. Very similar students on as many characteristics as we can find. And this is similar to a lot of the work that we've done and the research that you've seen. Not surprisingly, CUNY START students across the board gain proficiency in much higher rates than comparable students going through traditional remedial developmental coursework. So if you just focus on the dark blue bars, those are CUNY START percentages. And so while you see the dark blue bars are higher, much higher than the light blue bars, you also see that they're not the same. They're not equal across. And so you see for Asian students, for instance, almost 70% of students gain proficiency in math as compared to about 48% of Black students. And so what you see is even within CUNY START, you see these differences across racial and ethnic groups. Again, it's something that we're starting to look at. Similar with writing. So looking at the dark blue bars, again, that's CUNY START, so the percentage of students who gain proficiency in writing through CUNY START as compared to similar students going through the traditional courses. And you see, for both the light blue and the dark blue bars, they do differ by race, ethnicity. But what's really important and what we really want to look at as researchers and also in thinking about unequal opportunities and how the program is serving everyone is looking at the difference between the two bars, right? So for Asian and white students, you see quite large impacts in terms of proficiency gained for these students. They're pretty similar, looking at 38.5 percentage point gap between the proficiency rates for Asian students, and for white students, it's a 37.1 percentage point gap. But for Black and Hispanic students, that gap is not as large. There are a lot of additional questions that we need to, and additional data that we need to look at to really understand what's going on. But this is what we do see. We see these unequal differences between comparable students based on race, ethnicity. And so we really want to highlight that to then think about how, as a program, can we start to understand this better and potentially address it. Looking at program completion rates, this is not looking at comparison group students, this is just CUNY START. But I did break it out by gender. And so you see program completion rates also vary by race, ethnicity, and by gender. Next, we're looking at CUNY matriculation rates. And so as you saw earlier in the presentation, we do see encouraging matriculation rates and trends in terms of matriculation. But again, that metric, if you break it down by race, ethnicity, by gender, also by age, which is not here, but that's it's a big one as well. You see quite a big difference between these groups. And then finally, third semester retention rates. So this is where we even see more pronounced difference in terms of longer term outcomes. For Asian students and white students, especially the white, for white CUNY START students and Asian students, the third semester retention rates are higher for Black and Hispanic students who are also in CUNY START. Again, across the board for all of these groups, CUNY START does look better. So CUNY START is making a difference in these students' lives, but at the same time, it's really important for us to look at this and look at differences in outcomes across these groups. And so before I turn it over to Derek and I would want to open it up for a few questions, but I would want to leave you with thinking about how you can understand these data. There's a sheet in your folders that presents some data. It's a two-sided sheet with some questions, a space for reflection and questions in the bottom. Use that sheet. Use it with your staff and try to think about these issues. It's more data than what I was able to present today. But also, I would ask you to think about also the limitations of looking data this way as well. What we're presenting are outcomes by what appear to be 4 discrete buckets, right? I think we all know that something is very nuanced and complicated as race and ethnicity. It's much more in terms of diversity than these 4 buckets, right? In terms of how we measure students, racial ethnic affiliation, but also really understanding what's going on, how race intersects with language and immigration status and so forth. And so this is a very complicated, very nuanced subject, but this is really the first picture app. And so I would ask you to think about, what are the limitations of this data? What can these data not really tell you about the opportunity gap that you still would like to uncover, and what questions are still raised? But before we turn it over to Derek, any initial questions? Time? Yeah. The reading data, it's a little bit different, and I can certainly share with you after. Just trying to condense the time for the presentation. You still see similar trends. It's nothing. The story doesn't change with reading.
Might seem like a basic question, but I don't know what you mean by opportunities. What do you mean by opportunities in terms of the opportunity gap?
Sure. So I think I go back to the example of the.
Repeat the question, please. Sorry, my question was, what was meant by the term opportunity? I don't understand what is meant by opportunity gap.
So for me, I really go back to this. This is a very specific quote about a specific example of school resources. And so thinking about, for schools, school resources are not equal. It's an incredibly unequal landscape in terms of schools' funding, schools' ability to serve students and provide opportunities for students. And so this specific example, the fact that some schools simply don't have advanced math or science courses, don't offer AP, don't offer dual enrollment, don't have after-school curricular activities. Students don't have the opportunity to take these courses and engage in ways that other students at other schools do. A ton of research has really shown that. And so what I really want to focus on is figuring out, okay, how are opportunities unequal? And how do those unequal opportunities really then translate to students' preparation for college, and how then can CUNY start try to understand those opportunity gaps and then address it. Is that a good question? Did you want to?
Let me just amplify your question a little bit, amplify Drew's statement. It's a really important distinction because the achievement gap puts the focus on a deficit that the child has. Okay, so that when you look at black, white student achievement, when you look at black, Asian, black, Hispanic, it always becomes a question of what's lacking in the kid, as opposed to the opportunity gap reframes the question and deals with the structural type of issues that is raised in this particular example. So it shifts the blame from the student to actually the institutions, to teacher qualifications, preparation, the differences between affluent schools and schools in poor, low-income communities. So that's a really important distinction.
background of family income or class?
Yes, so not in this presentation, but I mentioned earlier that our office was doing a larger analysis of remediation and developmental education across CUNY. One of the things we're looking at is income, family income, but also the income of the neighborhood that students live. Right? How do students in the poorest neighborhoods of New York City do compared to the others, and how does that explain some of these differences? And not surprisingly, it does. It explains a lot of differences. Some encouraging results is some of that research looking at the effectiveness of CUNY START by income. It looks like CUNY START, from very preliminary data that we'll be presenting in a month, actually is slightly more beneficial to low-income students. That's incredibly encouraging, but that's something we're looking at.
Impacts people from matriculating once they're in CUNY START and their ability to pass college, even CUNY or community college. Are you going to be looking at that?
Absolutely. So in general, so the question was, are we going to be looking at other types of outcomes, kind of longer term outcomes by income, by other subgroups, and absolutely. One of the interesting things that we're doing is, and for you to think about, any outcome that you've heard us talk about or read about in any CUNY START studies or any research, including longer term impacts, we're now diving in and looking at those outcomes by race, ethnicity, by gender, by age, by income, by ESL status, and even native language. We're seeing some quite different results, but we're trying to uncover how CUNY START helps students from certain backgrounds. We are not looking at diversity of instructors. That's even data that we don't have right now. Certainly, that's a huge piece of the story, and what we're able to provide you is a very small piece of what's going on, right? A very tiny glimpse using the limited data we have around this very nuanced and complex issue. So I'd be really interested in further discussions at campuses about the role of instructors as well. So I think we'll have questions, time for questions at the end as well, but I wanted to hand it over to Derek. And I personally have so much respect for Derek as an educator and as a researcher. I've read some of his research, and it's really critical, not only as it relates to CUNY START, but its timing right now in this conversation. And when I started at CUNY 7 years ago, one of the very first things I did was take a trip up to CUNY Prep, and it was one of the first times meeting Derek and going to CUNY Prep that it kind of clicked to me as the reason why we're doing this, why we're crunching numbers in education really to help students, because the CUNY Prep, the environment and then the students were really impactful. So it's my pleasure to present with Derek.
So, thank you, Drew. And let me just say, first of all, I was here earlier. I don't know how to do this stuff, so somebody can help me out. So I was here earlier, and I heard the questions, and I'm going to tell you right now that you guys are making me nervous. You're a tough group, my goodness. Whoa, you guys, I've never seen anybody press John Mogileski like that. So I have to tell you, give yourselves a big round of applause for that. I worked for Mogileski for 10 years, and way to go. So the first thing I'm going to tell you is that I may offend some people because I'm going to talk about race. Let me say it again. I may offend some people because I'm going to talk about race. And I say that because a couple of weeks ago I did a presentation at Lehman College, and to the education faculty, and some people came up to me afterwards and said, you know, I really, really loved your presentation, but you know, we don't talk about black. And I said, well, we're here to talk about black. So, thank you very much for having me, and I hope to add to this conversation. I will say, again, another disclaimer is that I actually used a quantitative study to critique quantitative studies. So I'm coming at you from the perspective with great respect for Drew's work and the work of quantitative research and the importance of using it to, particularly in this climate, to make points. But I also want you to know that I am not a cognitivist, okay? That means that the value of test and testing to me are in some ways just something that we have to deal with, but I understand and respect the work that you do as educators, and that involves lives. And so what you're going to hear me talk to you about today is how I use the quantitative data set actually to suggest an alternative approach to education. So my dissertation was called What's Black Got to Do with It? An analysis of vulnerable low-income black students and educational outcomes. And so for what I did specifically is look at what is the impact of student characteristics, locus of control. That is the extent to which young people feel that they themselves are in control of their educational journey, or whether or not that has something to do with external forces. I looked at educational aspirations, that is, what does a student aspire to from 8th grade to 12th grade in terms of college going. I looked at school environment, urbanicity, premature adult life events, pregnancy, parenting, and or working, on the educational outcomes of low-income youth. So those were the variables that I was looking at, and I used a theoretical framework that is based largely on two different theories. Sociocultural theory posits that young people come to school with economic, culture, person, and gendered identities. That is that when young people come to a classroom or come to school, they're not just bringing their minds, they're also bringing with them a sense of who they are as a person, who they are as a male or female, who they are in terms of their ability to shop on Fifth Avenue or shop in a dollar store. And so socioculturalists ask us to look at those types of variables as being equally important to the educational outcomes of young people. I also looked at Agbu. Now, there's a lot of people who would say that Agbu's work is outdated. And John Agbu is an anthropologist of education. And he did a study in the mid-'80s of a group of high school students in DC, black male students. And he found, it was black students overall, and he found some very interesting things with the population of young people that he studied. One, he found that black students, particularly black men, very early begin to reject schooling because they see it as altering their ethnic identity. Imagine going to a history classroom and the curriculum begins with slavery. There you go, right? Begins with slavery, then takes you through the Reconstruction, then takes you through to the black codes and the fight for civil rights and, you know, all the things that black is, right, is expected to be mastered by these students. And so Agbu posits that, you know what, it's not that these students can't learn, they're refusing to learn. They are actually forming an oppositional identity to protect their own identity. So they're refusing to engage with the teacher or the curriculum, and so they begin to do that to protect their own ethnic identity. He also argues that there are students who develop relationships that are not based in or on real relations, birth relations, but this thing called fictive kinship. That is, you and me are alike because of our skin color, because of our class, because of our gender, and so therefore, I'm gonna start to hang out with you. And when I start to hang out with you, I'm doing less engagement in school. So I wanted to look at what type of impact, again, this is why I looked at locus of control, does Akbu's work have around the extent to which students are more motivated by their peers or themselves. Then finally, I looked or used the theoretical frame of Oyserman. And Oyserman did a study of middle school students in which they found that the extent to which students can imagine themselves having a positive outlook on life, a positive sense of who they can be, is directly related to their success in school. No big deal, okay? So what did I find? Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I should tell you what the study was. So I used NELS 88, which is a national sample with a total of 24,000 eighth graders surveyed. There are 4 follow-ups to the original study. And what I found is that when I looked at where the black students were located, 2/3 of the students in the NELS data were found in the low-income vulnerable group. So I said, oh, Drew, you can see that why that was the sample. Oh, this is interesting already. So what did we find? All low-income black students. Locus of control. The extent to which students feel that their educational success is that they are in control, okay, was positive and statistically significant. Educational outlook. Students who saw themselves as going to college immediately after high school, positive and statistically significant. Post-high school plans, same thing. Black female students. Now, this is where I want you to pay attention. It's getting very interesting. For black female students, locus of control was important. Pregnant or parenting, the only variables that impacted the educational outcomes of black female students, locus of control, pregnant and parenting. That's it. School size didn't matter. Teacher preparation didn't matter. All the other variables that I looked at did not matter. Now watch this. What's black got to do with it? What's gender got to do with it? Educational outlook for black men, positive, statistically significant. Urbanicity, that is the extent to which a school is located in an urban area versus a suburban area or a rural area, positive, statistically significant. Total school enrollment, how big the school is, positive and statistically significant. I'm sorry, negative, meaning the students, the school enrollment population, negative and statistically significant. Percent minority in school, that is, black men who go to school with a lot of black men, they ain't do too well. Gets worse. Black male students, you go to a school with a lot of poor people, you don't do well. Black male students, level of school problems, if you go to a school with a lot of problems, a lot of fighting, a lot of hanging out in the hallways, negative, statistically significant, you don't do well. Being in a marriage-like relationship, papi chulo, negative, statistically significant. And working in the 12th grade, negative and statistically significant. Now, see, that's when you gotta scratch your head and say, okay, now we know about this opportunity gap between black females and black males, but my study actually highlights for the first time, which is why some people think it was kind of important, that, wait a minute, this type of finding, and this is why also it took me so long to finish my PhD, because the people kept saying, this is interesting. You gotta revise. You gotta add more. You gotta look at black feminist theory. You gotta try to explain this, because that's just too big of a difference in terms of how these variables don't impact black females, but have such a huge impact on black male students. So this is when I actually began to take a turn left, okay? Which is why, again, I say that test scores and quantitative data are really the places where we begin the conversation as opposed to where we end it. And so I want to just give you a few examples. How many people have seen the show Empire? Raise your hand. Oh, this is my kind of audience. Boy, oh boy, this is what I'm talking about. It wasn't like that at the other school. Sorry. I can't help myself sometimes. Okay, so Empire. Almost everyone in the room hand went up, and so you know as well as I do that it is one of the most watched TV shows, okay? And why is that? What's black got to do with it? That's what you were supposed to say. This show has such crossover appeal, okay? White, black audiences, rich, poor, that it again highlights for me the importance of socio-cultural approaches to education. Now, I'm trying to figure out how to do this.
Hey, I'm Tyranda and I play Portia, Cookie Lyon's assistant on Empire. Catch me up. You must be sitting down. Okay, to King. I still ain't got no comment on that. They hit the red carpet, then one half of them goes home to hit another carpet. Look, I don't judge. Love is love. Speaking of which, Lucius finally pops the question. She said she had shoes signed for that ring. What else she gonna say? Jamal takes Cookie to the sketchiest recording studio on planet Earth. You keeping it ghetto, that's for sure. Meanwhile, Andre gets an early Christmas gift. Loves us. Cookie tries to make a little piece for the past and names the shooter who took out her dealer. Only they left out one little part. He was a fan. Yeah, they tell her that after she names names. Real nice. When she finds a rose outside her door, she grabs a gun, a fabulous hat, and hightails it out of there. Big brother Andre proves he's a big something else. First, he and the missus released a video of Tiana and her gal.
Post the photo on all sites to follow Hakeem.
Done. Next, he said some of Hakeem's crew to Jamal's recording session.
Wearing $1,200 shoes and a $20,000 watch. You keep me here, that's another Hey, come on, clean this one.
In both cases, things go a little cray-cray, wicked fast.
What you doing?
Look, you got a side piece too.
Everybody, you ever get shot? Did my little brother tell you to lie?
Shut up! And while all this going down, Lucius struck a deal with his bride-to-be's Patty.
The Hakeem goes through and I die. Let me go with the kind of billion having her own right.
He'll take care of her for life if Daddy Doctor helps him with his disease. In the end, everybody get what they want. Jamal gets a killer trap, Hakeem gets 2 girlfriends, and me, I get a well-deserved snack. Oh, and did I mention the part where Cookie hooks up and take care of the man who left the rose outside her door? I need the roses to stop.
Takes care of business.
Turns out Lucius left the rose outside her doorstep. Oh my God, Lucius, you got a car? Yeah. Not good. Not good at all.
So I use the Empire example to basically highlight the sheet that you have in your folder. I think they just gave it out, yeah. So, one, the show illustrates for me how economics plays a role in the daily experience of the young people that we serve, okay? This is a show about hip hop, and there's a certain set of resources that come along with the way in which they live. Very important to consider. It's also important to examine the other pieces, like the culture, okay? Empire is putting black on TV like never before, okay? It also explores gender and identity issues within the black community that have previously been conversations that we don't talk about in our culture, particularly, in front of other people. Jesus Christ. Me, gay uncle and that type of stuff. So I want to leave you with a challenge. And what I firmly believe in as a pedagogue and as an educator is, again, test scores are, a place to begin the conversation. But what we've been able to do, or what I advocate, is an alternative approach. And I'm going to just get to that real quickly, and then so I can have time for questions. By suggesting an alternative approach. And here is what we did pedagogically at Medgar Evers. So the president gave me the opportunity to create an elite honors program for 50 students at Medgar. These are students who had a combined SAT score in math and reading of a minimum of 1,800. And so what we did is move from the test score, meaning they did very, very well on the SAT. They had a CAA, or average, high school average, of at least 85. So very, very talented students. And so we wanted to attract a different type of student at Medgar than we normally have. 80% of the students at Medgar Evers College come in needing remediation. And so we wanted to construct an opportunity to learn from these students from the beginning. And so, like PhD people do, they take an opportunity to embed their work, their dissertation, into their work. And so this is what I did. So I redesigned our freshman seminar course in a way that would capture everything that I just talked to you about in those three lenses: socioeconomics, culture, and gender, and person identity, okay? Another thing I'll tell you is that at Medgar, and this is, again, one of the things that, let me just also give you another disclaimer. My dissertation looked at low-income black students, so the extent to which it's generalizable is the extent to which you broaden it out, right? By including low-income Latino students, low-income white students, low-income Asian students, low-income students in general. So what I did was say, okay, if I know that it's important that locus of control, aspirations, college-going culture are really important, how can I construct a way for students to come into the conversation that would give me and them an opportunity to explore their personal experiences, their academic experiences, and their social experiences, okay? So I basically tried to tease out my dissertation in a way that would give students an invitation to participate. So what do? I said, and this is something that we used to do at CUNY Prep, as an admissions requirement. We're going to ask every student to do an autobiography and a digital portfolio. And we're going to do this by first asking students to chart the ups and downs of their academic experiences, their personal, and their social experiences. Okay, you're going to create a timeline. Highs at the top, lows at the bottom. So I'll give you an academic low for me. I had such a hard time learning my multiplication tables because in 3rd grade I had a teacher that all she used to do is yell. And so I turned off. So I developed an oppositional identity to math because I can't stand people screaming at me to this day. So that's an academic low that I would put on my timeline. Using the timeline, you then move to develop an autobiography, okay? And a collage. Now, again, I'm a visual learner. So for me, the timeline, then the autobiography, then a collage, but in this case, I asked students to do a digital portfolio, okay? Charting and illustrating their academic, personal, and social experiences. Timeline, collage, and autobiography. Now, again, the idea, because I'm a pedagogue like you guys, is that we're going to go from easy to the hardest, okay, with guided instruction from the instructor as we work towards mastery. What were the results? 47 students took the course, 4 Fs, 0 Ds, 0 Cs, 25 Bs, 10 As, 8 A pluses. 43 timelines, 43 autobiographies, 12 pages single space, 43 digital portfolios. The students absolutely loved it. They want to tell you their story. They want to tell you why math is difficult. They want to tell you why writing is difficult, but they want to do it by talking about themselves, something a test can't do. So again, my argument here is that sociocultural approaches to education actually give us more information and more ability to work students towards successful educational outcomes. And so while, again, I value the importance of baseline testing and the like, I think that our lives and our work can be enriched by really giving students an opportunity to engage with us in ways that allow them to bring their full self to the classroom. Because guess what? The one thing we learned at CUNY Prep, and I see it every day at Medgar, at the end of the day, we can pretend that students don't come to us as living in an economic space, whatever that is, or a gendered space. We have 3 students at Medgar that have transitioned gender identity while at Medgar's College. I mean, it's like something that people wouldn't imagine. But sexuality, gender identity, all of these things have everything to do with educational success and educational outcomes. And so I leave you with that, and then ask you to look at this chart again. Because what we want you to do is to think about 3 things. At the end of the day, we are looking to build agency, voice, while holding you responsible. See, that's the important part. And Drew, I love that quote you put up there earlier. People will argue that cognitivists and test is academic rigor. I'm arguing that sociocultural is rigor as well. Okay? So in my book, don't allow people to confuse this idea of if you don't do well, if you're not testing, then somehow you're not holding students to high standards. That's absurd and it's ridiculous. Okay? Because at the end of the day, we want students to have agency, going back to the dissertation, locus of control. We want students, because we know it matters. I need you to help your students develop a sense of power within. I need you to help your students develop a sense that their voice and their come from space matters. Whether that be a culture of A, B, C, or D. You can replace those with being Haitian, being whatever it is. But your voice matters. Okay? And in third, I want you to develop a sense of student responsibility for their own educational success. So those 3 things taken together is what a socio-cultural paradigm shift looks like. It moves from test only to there's more to the story. So the question for you is, consider a programmatic, pedagogical, advisement, co-curricular, or professional development topic, and then chart out some observations, and then imagine some strategies that you can use that are socioeconomically relevant, culturally relevant, and responsive. See, and that's an important, I'm gonna shut up real fast, I promise you. See, Ladson Billings came up with this concept of being culturally relevant in the 80s, and very important. But the idea was, I'm just gonna include some black people in the slideshow. So now we're representative. No, folks, it's not enough. Relevant and responsive. That means that, you are relevant and actually, it takes 2 to tango. So I'm gonna be responsive to your cultural ways of being, your cultural ways of knowing, your culturally responsive to your ways of affection. That's really, really important. Relevant without responsiveness is not relevant. Okay? And then finally, person and gender relevant. Your personhood matters. I understand that there's a difference between females and males. I understand that there are equal but different challenges for black men than black females. And you can take that, and go with it. Thank you. Questions, comments, concerns?
Thank you so much for everything that you've just shared. I feel very moved. I'm wondering if I'm from LaGuardia, I'm the director of CUNY Start at LaGuardia. I would be thrilled if you would come join our team and do some trainings and to kind of further this discussion and to really talk about how we can bring these models into our seminar lessons and in our advisement engagement and even curricularly. I think it's really, really important. Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you.
Hi, thank you. Sorry. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about fictive kinship, and you seem to be saying that it's stronger for low-income black men, and why that's so, and how that relates to all of the factors that end up impacting low-income black male performance in schools that you went through.
So, fictive kinship, again, is the idea that we have a common bond, right, that's not marital or birth. And so here's the thing that my quick response, and this is something that I learned at CUNY Prep. A lot of these ideas have been years in the making, but one thing that I learned and that we know from adolescence is peers matter. It matters so much. You know, the extent to which a young person makes it on the block, for example, has everything to do with what people on the block are doing. If nobody on your block is going to school every morning, then you better believe that you're gonna have to get real creative about how you make it out the building to get down the block and off the block to go to school. So the notion of fictive kinship is a very natural relationship between my needs as an adolescent to belong, right? And essentially where I am and who I'm connected to. And you see the same thing as you extend into the early college years. The fact of the matter is, when you come to Medgar or any other school these days, college is, nobody's like, how many book bags do you see? A lot? You have one, Gail. You don't see a lot of book bags. I mean, the bottom line is, sexy is not, looking collegiate. So it's about the need to belong, okay? That's a short answer to the fictive kinship question. Others?
Hi, Derek. I'm LaShala. I'm the assistant director at BMCC for CUNY Start. I really appreciate this conversation, and Drew, the work that you're doing, looking into this. And I just want to share, because I did share with my colleagues last week how angry I was coming to work a couple of days last week, just thinking about inequality and the socioeconomic issues and how much that impacts our students, and very personally, some of my family members' opportunity to pursue an education and possibly become successful, or definitely to do better in their lives. So I'm just wondering, with the data that you're doing, and this question may be more for Drew, with the data that you're doing, it shows that black men are either not doing well in school as other ethnicities, or not enrolled in considerable numbers. at all. And so I'm just wondering, how can this data be used to address this national socio-cultural opportunity? My thought is that the data needs to be used to help meet the students where they are and provide students resources where they are. And if it's not on the campuses, then what are your plans for providing resources in the community and doing outreach where the students really are?
Well, I think you kind of answered part of your question around kind of one of the first steps is looking at the data and just understanding how can programs understand how to allocate resources. I think Derek provided a great answer to kind of what's next after you kind of understand preliminary data. The next step is how can you take what we know, even limited information about quantitative data, and put it into action. Really take it and implement different strategies that can help. A lot of the work of our data is simply starting conversations. A lot of people, most programs, and a lot of institutions of higher education and in the high schools just don't look at this type of data, don't really cut outcomes by different groups of students. And so I think that part of it is just starting the conversations and just putting sheets of data in front of you, showing outcomes and showing how different they are. And then I think one of the things that we're starting to do is work with community-based organizations and working with organizations across the city to think about recruitment. And so I think we'll be meeting as part of the funded research from the Hilton Foundation, really thinking about supporting youth transitioning out of foster care. A lot of that work is starting to build partnerships with CBOs that support youth in foster care, but support a lot of other students that are on track to potentially enroll in CUNY Start. And so a lot of these conversations will be based on data. And I think the more we can have conversations, really to look and share an understanding of what the challenges and really the unequal opportunities are, I think the better.
Let me amplify that too, because I think two things. One is, to your point exactly, people, and this is why it makes me angry too, because, to take SES off the table is to just ensure that people who don't historically go to college will continue to not go, period. Which is why things like Metro cards, Donna, we learned that back at CUNY Prep. The fact of the matter is, if you do not have a way to get to school, you ain't going. Forget about getting off the block, you just don't have the resources. So it's about really sort of zeroing in on the things that we know are barriers, okay? We run a Petrie grant at Medgar, I'm the PI. And $100,000, $60,000 of that, of our Petrie money each year is used on food and transportation. So, it bothers me when we don't have these conversations about how SES actually impacts outcomes. So, great question. I think we've got time for a couple more, Gail and Donna.
I just have a quick question, Derek. Could you talk a little bit about some of the out-of-the-box strategies that you used when you were at CUNY Prep? Because you really reached young men in a way that I'd never seen before, and I think it's important for us to think about if we're talking about, change.
I appreciate that. And just to contextualize, every year at CUNY Prep for 8 years, we graduated more boys than girls. So we actually bucked the national average, the averages of the high schools. Every year for 8 years, we graduated more boys than girls. And how did we do it? One is we took, the dissertation, just this stuff, it was, again, like I said, we thought about this. I've been thinking about this for a long time. One, we addressed head on this idea of, you're Black and Latino, and when I say more males, I mean Black and Latino males. Your identity as Black and Latino males requires us to pay attention to that, okay? So I'm concerned about challenging the imagery associated with black men and Latino men not being successful or not going to school. So we intentionally worked with our black men and our Latino men to develop an identity that was not what they saw on the block, okay? So our Latin kings, we engaged our Latin kings in a way to say, how is it that we can use that which you belong to get your brotherhood to support education? We took it head on. We took it right to them. The Bloods, the Crips, the Latin Kings, we went right there and said, you know what we need, brother? We need you to support these young men who are trying to get their lives back on track. Yep, your responsibility. I can't do it alone. That's one concrete strategy. Another thing that we did is we invited the students in to tell us their story at the beginning. CUNY Prep was a requirement to get into the school was to complete an autobiography in which we said this: if you are a member of a gang and you don't declare, and we find out later, what happened, Malloy? What happened? You're out, period. So we're gonna give you an opportunity, right? And we're gonna accept you as you are, right? But we're gonna hold you to having very, very high expectations. So that's the other key piece, okay? And I can talk more about this, but I'll do it offline. I wanna I'll give Donna a question, but you can't be afraid to re-engineer identities. You can't be afraid to address the economic, the personal, the social, and the academic. And you have to hold students to very high expectations. Donna.
Thanks, Derek, Andrew, for your presentation. I was wondering if you have any final thoughts on what can be done on the other side of the house, specifically the degree side of the house, where there's this, basic discomfort with the types of honest dealing with identities and very openly accepting students for who they are, where they are, as well as the individual, whether it's a faculty member, a staff member, chairperson, presidents, basic discomfort with the issue of race and people being honest in who they are and where they come from. Because I feel that the other half of the equation is how, however honestly and lovingly and in the most welcome way we here in CUNY Start and potentially in ASAP work with students, there's this infrastructure which is designed to ignore who people are, particularly black men, I feel. So I'm just curious, what do you think are some things that should be done on the degree side of the house, particularly someone who's a senior member of a college, to do some professional development of our own?
Thank you. And Donna always asks the hard questions. Well, there's two things, and I'll give you an example. Last week, I was called into a psychology classroom because of an explosive environment. Two students were getting into it, black men. And, I think that the more we begin to see the issues of gender and race and SES play out in those types of classroom moments, people will begin to invite people to the table to have the discussion. Because what happened is that psychology professor actually felt she lost control. She lost control of the classroom. And she came to me and she said, Dean Griffith, there's only 2 times in my life that I thought I was going to quit. And it was this event and one other time. It's an older faculty member. And she said, I just was paralyzed. And I didn't know what to do. And I didn't know who to come to. so I came to the Dean of Student Affairs. So we have a younger population, we have a much more vocal population, and I hate to say it, Donna, but there is no attention to this on the other side of the house until it starts to affect their bottom line. And so, you know, until enrollment drops, and I can speak honestly because, you know, whatever. I have a PhD now. So until their bottom lines, I mean, I had a senior president say to me, oh, let's just cut to the bottom line. Okay, well, I'll just shut down and just, you know, pack my little stuff up and, you know, boil it down to one sentence. But, you know, at the end of the day, until enrollment is affected, both in colleges and in the majors, until the classrooms start to break down, I don't have much hope that it's going to happen. And here's what I'm afraid of, Donna. And this is one that you guys want to be real careful about. Because our students, your students, are particularly susceptible to this. Well, the faculty member's first instinct was call public safety. Now, I know there's some good public safety friends here. I know that, okay? And I'm not saying public safety or, you know, all bad. But I am saying that the instinct to criminalize the behavior as opposed to trying to understand the behavior puts your students, this young man is looking at me, he's like, yeah. He's not looking at me, but I can see your head shaking. He's saying, yeah, you're about to tell that story, yeah, because this is how, yeah. Your students are particularly at risk, ASAP, CUNY Star, of being criminalized for not being able to bring their socio-cultural selves to the table. And so I'm fearful that instead of us having the conversation, right, because the bottom line hasn't been affected yet, that's what's going to happen. Thank you all very, very much for your attention.